hour drive, and we went past Bishop and Mammoth Mountain. I don't know if any of you know or ever been past Mammoth Mountain, but in February with the fresh snow, it's beautiful. Unlike Harvey with fresh snow in March. Which, by the way, Dave, you should really get in marketing. Thinking of donating a tow rope right after a big snow like that, that's pretty clever. Good job. So we're going past Mammoth Mountain, and it's just gorgeous with all that snow on there. And people go out there and go to the top and race to the bottom so that they can go back to the top and race to the bottom again, which I don't really understand, but that's their thing. And I take a picture of that snow on that mountain, and I send a text message to my wife with the photo attached that said, "Here's what you're missing by not being here." Don't ever do that. I got a text message back right away that had an audio attachment with that goat crying and said, "Here's what you're missing by not being here. These twins were born an hour and a half ago in a snowbank, and I still have them in the pickup on the floorboard trying to warm them up. Leave again this time of year, and you're in big trouble." So I keep that text message as my go just to remind me not to share everything that I take part in on the road with my wife. So, and then the other part of that is that you do know that when I travel and go to airports, the absolute, and this is an absolute true story, the last thing that I do when I get on an airplane is call my wife to see how things are going, because we do have 150 beef cows, we've got 100 mother goats, nannies, we've got 40 horses, and now we've got 25 sows. So the other day I'm getting on a plane in Detroit, I sit down on the seat, we've been kidding goats at the house for 2 weeks. I called home and I said, "Honey, did we have any more kids today?" Another set of triplets? Well, needless to say, when I hung up the phone, the lady sitting next to me was not very happy with me that my wife had triplets and I wasn't there to help her. And I started thinking about all of the things that we say in agricultural circles, and people, we don't even think about how they respond or what it is that they hear. And I am such a slow learner, because just the other day, it was 3 weeks ago, Chicago O'Hare Airport, I had weaned 3 sows before I left the house. I had the semen in the basement, so Kelly, all she has to do is heat check the sows, and if they're in good standing, heat breed them. So I'm at F12. I remember the gate, standing in front of F12. I called home and I said, "What about the sows, Kelly?" And she said, "Well, they're not in good standing heat yet." I just blurted out, "Well, I wouldn't waste the semen on them." And I started looking around, and there's like 12 people ready to go get TSA and get this wacko carted out of the airport. You know, and all of that, you know exactly where I'm at, but all of that, what it really boils down to is that we gather in meetings like this, and we talk about the vital necessity of converting natural resources into human consumable products. And then in the next breath, we voice the concern of the people who live in the cities. And I contend it's not just the people who live in the cities. I contend it's the people in Wells and Kidder County and Burleigh County that are not directly involved in agriculture that don't get it. It doesn't need to be from a large city to have people that don't understand. Paul Gunnarsson and I have had a tremendous conversation at dinner talking about just 1 or 2 generations removed, even within our own commodity organizations, and people lose touch with what it really takes. And another thing that I really just accidentally stumbled upon in the past couple of weeks is the fact that there's no wonder that people don't get what it is that we do. Friday, I'm in Muskegon, Michigan, with 110 farm women in agriculture. Farm Women Symposium. And I would guess there were 6, what do we... I was clapping all day Friday. You might as well clap a little while now. You know, I'll bring that up because somebody said, "Well, Trent, you sure seem to spend a lot of time with farm women groups." And first of all, to remind them that San Francisco, things have not taken over the country, that this is basically a good thing at some level. But secondly, farm women groups are typically the first to get involved in telling a story and to be advocates for agriculture. And that's why I spend so much time California Women for Agriculture, Farm Women Symposium. when you just let your emotions flow and go forward and tell the story. And I applaud them for that and challenge you gentlemen to all be better in doing that. But back to my Farm Women's Symposium. 110 women, 6 I would say at every table, and I asked one person from each table to stand up and finish this sentence. Agriculture is. How would you finish that sentence? You know what we ended up with? I don't know if there were 6 people at each table. We had what? 20 tables? We got 20 different answers. Because even for those of us in agriculture, agriculture means something different. And if we all have a different answer to that question, how is it that we can expect the non-farm person to automatically know what agriculture is? And I remind you, speaking of San Francisco, it was just 3 years ago that I got on an elevator one night, late at night in San Francisco, and this guy got on the elevator with me. He looks at me and he says, "You're not from around here, are you?" Which personally I find comforting, not to fit in San Francisco. That's a completely different issue. I said, "No, sir, I'm in from Nebraska." And he says, "What brings you to town?" I said, "I'm here for an agricultural meeting." And the guy looked me right in the eye and he said, "What is agriculture?" Now, what's the #1 agricultural producing state in the nation? California. Even though, as I said, California, most of it, I can see it in your eyes, with the land of fruits and nuts. No wonder they don't know what agriculture is. But California is the #1 agricultural producing state in the nation. And how big is California agriculture? If you take Texas #2 and combine it with Iowa #3, you do not equal what California produces in agricultural products each year. And I can get on an elevator and a guy from right in the middle of San Francisco, which is the heart of California agriculture, can look me in the eye and say, "What is agriculture?" And if each one of us have a different answer to that question, how can we be bewildered at all that 310 million Americans don't understand what agriculture is? To me, it's quite simple. It's the conversion of natural resources into human consumable products that enables mankind. Food, fiber, pharmaceuticals, and fuel. You show me a nation that does not have a strong agricultural system, and I'll show you a nation where the people are struggling. And really, if you think about it, we are ultimately doing God's work because we have been given X amount of resources, and it's our sweat, intelligence, and work ethic that takes those resources and converts them into something that people need, not that they have, and you spend their extra disposable income on at the end of the year. And we do it so efficiently in the United States that the United States consumer spends less than 10% of their annual income each year on food, unlike any other country in the world. The next closest nation, even Canada, at 16%. And if we sit here in our farming and ranching communities and say they don't understand us, they just don't get it, it's not their fault. It's ours. Because we are not comfortable in talking to people that we don't know. We're not comfortable talking to people that we don't agree with. And I try to every day find somebody that I don't agree with and have a respectful conversation. Now, it appears as though I'm spending a lot of time picking on California. I love California. And in fact, what I have learned last year, by the way, 14 times I spoke in the state of California. It got to be so bad that the first week of this year I went back to Napa Valley. My wife went with me because she said, "You're going out there every month. I'm going along to see if you're incubating a family or what's going on." But the challenges are great in a state where there are 30+ million people that don't get it. And we have to find a way to bridge that gap. And I went to the Cow Palace last fall, and you know, they have a protest of the rodeo. Well, how in the world could you protest a rodeo? Well, here's how well they do it in San Francisco. They had lines drawn in the pavement as to where protesters could be and couldn't be. That's how regularly they have protests in California. So as Pat the protester is out front, and it comes over the loudspeaker with all the people that work at the Cow Palace have radios, and it comes over the radio that we have protesters at the front gate. What do all the people, the contestants involved in the rodeo say and do? Oh, those idiots, they just don't get it and walk off. What did Trent do? Grabbed his microphone and ran out there. And I had a conversation with Pat the protester. Got my recorder off my hip, and I started visiting with Pat the protester. Now here's where it gets a little bit intimidating, because the minute I got my recorder out and put it in his face, they had 4 video cameras all on me. And what were they waiting for me to do? Make a fool of myself. And within 10 minutes, it would have been on YouTube saying, look what the cowboys are doing at the Cow Palace. Instead, what I did was record Pat the protester talking about how much he disagrees with rodeo. And why do you disagree with rodeo, Pat? He said, because the people involved have no compassion for the animals whatsoever. He said, in fact, the other day, I was at a rodeo, the bull came out of the chute, bucked the cowboy off, the bull defecated all over himself, and the announcer said, oh, look, he brought his own guacamole with him. Anybody have chips? And I said, so what's the deal there? Well, don't you think that bull's feelings were hurt? I said, Pat, do you really think the bull knew what the announcer was saying in English? He said, well, of course, and you know those bulls have feelings. What I do know is that I played that on the radio the next day, and 4 million people that listen to my radio show know that Pat the protester is a complete whack job that you don't need to worry about. But we had a respectful conversation, and maintained my composure, and allowed him to expose himself for what he really is. And if we're going to address the really hard issues, that's what we have to do, is confront them more often. And I'm talking about confronting without losing your composure. And that is tough for us to do, because the first time somebody gets in your face and tells you you're an axe-murdering Neanderthal if you take the life of a cow, which doesn't happen in Loud's house, because this cow's evidently going to live to be 100. I think next year we're going to auction off beef bundles. I just got a feeling, okay? We'll see. Where did Lydia go now? She already ran out on me. We'll see, but I think we'll have beef bundles a year from now. One other thing that I want to tell you about the Cow Palace, because it was a tremendously educational moment for me. Last April, I was driving down the road. I remember specifically driving through Bartlett, Nebraska, when my phone rang, and it turned out to be a guy named Seth Dalton. Seth Dalton spent 22 years as a bullfighter for Cotton Rosser and Rodeo. So we've already established that he's not really sane either. But anyway, he called me and he said, Trent, I've been charged with putting the cow back into the Cow Palace. And I don't know how much any of you know about Northern California and the livestock industry, but the Cow Palace and the Grand National was the creme de la creme of livestock events. In fact, most ranchers will tell you they met their wife at the Cow Palace. I mean, it was the event. He said, I want to put the cow, and by the way, it had fallen to the point where last year, the year before, in 2009, they didn't even have a Grand National because poor leadership and people that don't understand the importance of animal agriculture. So Seth Dalton calls me and he says, Trent, I'm told that you're just the person that can help us put the cow back into the Cow Palace. What do you think we should do? I said, Seth, I want to think on it. And I ultimately drove another 100 miles and I called him back and I said, here's what we need. We need the entire community of San Francisco buzzing and excited about the cow. We need to get people to come to this event, which will bring the legislators, which we really need to have some serious conversations with. But we're not going to get them there unless we have their constituents there. So we need to get the people there. And how do we get the people? I say we do this. We establish a contest for any San Francisco business owner that wants to participate to proudly brag in their lobby, on their front door, wherever they want to do it publicly, about how they use a cow. Now wait a minute, how many businesses in San Francisco use a cow? Anybody want to guess? How many businesses in Harvey, North Dakota use a cow?
All of them.
What?
All of
Every
them.
single one. I guarantee you there's not a shop in Harvey or San Francisco that I can't walk into and find a component of a cow. Every tire has stearic acid in it. Stearic acid is what gives the tire shape. Do you ever wonder why the tire has no tube and yet it holds its shape even if it's flat? It's thanks to stearic acid from a cow. Every single picture, Terry Redlin would not be Terry Redlin without components that come from a cow. 110 life-saving pharmaceuticals used in medical clinics every day across this country come from a cow. Thrombin is a component of animal agriculture that is used in every single surgery to prevent the patient from bleeding out on the table. Comes from a cow. Every violin. Oh my goodness, you go to San Francisco and you talk to some of these music folks who think they don't need animal agriculture and they're stringing their violin. Oh, that's a fun conversation. Every woman who tells me they don't need a cow as they smear makeup on their face from a dead rendered cow. That's a fun conversation. Ball bearings, pencils, you name it. Every single business as a component of the cow. So I said, Seth, let's put together a contest where these businesses, if they so choose, can be a part of this. And then in the Grand National, we will give the 3 top award winners 40 tickets to the rodeo. And the extreme winner will get a ride in the Wells Fargo Stagecoach during the grand entry of the rodeo performance. Let's get a meeting with the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce and ask them for buy-in. Because if we get the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce to start promoting it to their members, this is good. Last May, we went to San Francisco. Libby actually went with me on this trip. We had a sit-down meeting with Marie McAvoy. Been at the San Francisco for 27 years. We walk in, Seth Dalton introduces us. He tells her that he's in charge of putting the cow back into the cow palace. He explains how he's going to bring the live animals there. He says, and Trent has an idea that he thinks might be beneficial to you at the Chamber of Commerce. And I walk her through this contest idea on how every business uses a cow, even though they did. And if you notice, I didn't talk about what everybody always thinks about when they hear the cow, the ribeye, and the leather. I simply talked about the things that people don't know about. And when I got done explaining this contest to her, Marie McAvoy said, well, Mr. Luce, your timing is quite interesting. Because here in the Chamber of Commerce office in the last 6 months, we've decided that we don't know enough about modern agriculture. And in fact, we've been going to your website every month to pull factoids, putting in our newsletter. You could have picked me up off of the floor that anybody in San Francisco knew that we even existed. And then she turned to Seth Dalton, and she said, and Seth, I've been here at the Chamber of Commerce in San Francisco for 27 years, and it's the first time anybody has ever come and asked us to be a part of anything. That was the story for me. Wade, we always complain about the people who don't get what it is that we do, don't know what it is that we are. And we rarely walk up to them and say, what would you like to know about agriculture? Instead, we huddle with the people that we're friends with and we most know. Go out of our comfort zone, Mark, and start asking people to come in and see what it is that we have to offer. Because every time, I guarantee you, you're going to learn that these people want to know more. In fact, then we did have the Grand National the 3rd week in October. And one thing that we did was we brought 3,000 third graders from the San Francisco metropolitan area to the Cow Palace. And I latched on to one group, Mrs. Edwards, been teaching in the San Francisco 3rd grade school, public school system for 32 years. I latched on to her and I went through every station with them, 8 different stations. Learned about branding, learned about ID, learned about all of the food and crops produced in California, learned about the rodeo. 8 different stations. And when we got done, I pulled my recorder off my hip and I said, what do you think, Mrs. Edwards? She said, I have to tell you that I saw the greatest degree of respect for animals that I ever seen in my life. And she said, it's nothing like I expected. I said, what did you expect? Well, I had heard and read on the internet. In fact, she said, this morning at breakfast, my husband even told me, you know, Patsy, you're going to see things that are not going to set well with you, and you're going to have to shield the kids from some of the things you see. And she said, I didn't see anything along that line, and in fact, everything that I saw is exactly opposite of what I've heard. And I said, what do you think about modern food production? I'm talking in particular about cages for egg-laying hens, about cattle feedlots, about gestation stalls, about biotechnology. She said, oh, I'm sure if I toured any of those farms, it would be just terrible, and it would be just awful, and I wouldn't want to see anymore. I said, did you ever think, Mrs. Edwards, that if you got the opportunity to go to some of those farms, you would find everything that you have been told and heard is actually not true? And she said, you know, after what I've witnessed today, I'll bet you're right. Finding ways to visit with people that we otherwise think don't like us or don't know us. It is the absolute way in telling the story. We are at a point in time when everybody, particularly in agricultural circles, wants to find the right celebrity spokesperson that we can hire to go tell agriculture story. We want to pool a bunch of money and have this new Farm and Ranch Alliance. I'm not talking about one in particular, I'm talking about in general, that is going to go out and connect the dots. There is only one way that we connect the dots between food producers and food consumers. And it's that each one of us, every day, one person at a time, find a way to educate somebody. And you do not need to travel to 39 states a year. You don't need to travel to 2 states a year, because I guarantee you, in Harvey, in Medina, whatever town it is that you call home, you hear people misspeak in the halls of this school, sitting in those bleachers during basketball games, in church functions. You hear people misspeak. And you have two choices. To approach them and say, you know, that's actually not true, and here's why. Or you can continue to do the easy thing and walk away. And we have to stop walking away, because the challenges continue to grow. The challenges in that, I'm afraid that as we go through this unprecedented time of tremendous I call it prosperity in agriculture, that we become very complacent. We're at a time when we have great prices for commodities, and we're exporting around the world, and we have the U.S. government coming at us with a new set of regulations that are unprecedented. This is just how ironic it is. 2 weeks ago, the EPA held its first ever listening session on taking the micron dust level from the maximum of 150 microns to 65. Virtually making it illegal for you to drive down a drop rock road. Okay? The same exact week that the first 2 listening sessions were held, one in Kansas City, one in Des Moines, Iowa, there was a report that came out that Paul can get you all the background on from North Carolina and from Iowa that documented kids who breathe dust, farm dust on a daily basis, are 30 to 50% less likely to develop asthma. Isn't that ironic? We're trying to minimize the amount of dust in the atmosphere at a time when we are learning that science says that kids who breathe dust are healthier. And that's on the heels of a New Zealand study last summer that said farmers who breathe animal manure are 5 times less likely to contract any disease, including cancer, because they're inoculating themselves with exposure to the organisms. Here's what I'm saying. Every community in America should develop and have a livestock facility in their town city limits, so that every morning there's a blanket of fresh manure that covers the town and the cars and everything and inoculates people. We will do it for free. Just let us build the livestock facility. That's the science. But how do we get the science to come through and be applicable to? Well, I'm missing something really good here. What do we got going on here? How do we balance the science? Because what we want to do is we want to take, which by the way, North Dakota State University, the underdog, the best kept secret in the entire land grant system. Every time I go there, I come back completely rejuvenated about how much progress comes out of North Dakota State University, and the rest don't even really know that it exists. You just sit up here and do your own thing, and it's just incredible. But we generate a 17-page science report, and we have to condense it to a bumper sticker, or people are never going to get it. We live in a world of bumper stickers. In fact, I've now decided agriculture's bumper sticker should be that agriculture is not a job, it's a calling. Agriculture is not a job, it's a calling. It's a calling because we have these resources, as I walked through before. Here's my great frustration about agriculture today. How many dairymen in the room? Not surprising. Dairymen have not had a couple of good years. A couple guys have Jersey heifers, but maybe don't dairy. Why are dairymen not having... They're having a decent year this year, except for high feed costs. But why have the past 2 years been poor in the dairy industry? What's the common thought? Too much milk, right? You hear it every day. We got too much milk. We need to get from 9.2 million dairy cows to 8.7 million dairy cows. We're even having dairymen now talking about supply management, limiting the amount of milk that a dairyman can produce. Do we have too much milk in the United States? No. Why not? We're importing. 80% of all teenage girls are calcium deficient. 50% of all Americans are calcium deficient. 50% of all Americans are vitamin D deficient. Mayo Clinic reports that we have more bone breaks and poor bone health teenagers than we've ever had before. Why? Because we drink pop instead of milk. In 1944, the year that we started enhancing milk with vitamin D, our per capita consumption of milk was at 64 gallons. Do you know what our per capita consumption of whole milk is today? 8. I can't imagine why we have a problem with calcium, can you? Absolutely not, because we don't understand basic nutrition anymore. I got into an all-out argument with a lady last week at Farm Women's Symposium because I shared the fact that bacon is the new health food. It absolutely is. The fat in bacon is monounsaturated fat. The same exact fat that you get from olive oil. We had a University of North Carolina research study that came out this past 6 months ago that documented pregnant mothers who eat eggs and bacon every morning for breakfast have smarter kids because of the choline in the eggs and because of the choline in the bacon and the monounsaturated fat from the bacon. So old Trent, even though I'm not pregnant, in case you were wondering, figures that if bacon and eggs are good for an unborn child, probably wouldn't be too bad for my intelligence. That's the science. This lady got up, she said, "You can't tell me that bacon's good." I said, "Just look at the science. The science says that you should be eating. In fact, the science says that you should eat a high-protein, high-fat breakfast every day. It stimulates your metabolism, and you consume fewer calories throughout the course of the rest of the day because you have a satisfied feeling." And yet, you can go to many people who are in the dietetics world, and they'll still tell you, minimize your fat. We just don't get it. In fact, I don't remember if we talked about vitamin D last year, but I want to share with you just a few things because this will resonate with many of you here. 50% of all Americans are vitamin D deficient. What's the number one food source with available vitamin D? What? Greens? No. Sunshine is absolutely important to activate the vitamin D in your skin. But you have to have the component in your skin, in your body, for the sun to activate. Okay, first of all, what is vitamin D made of? Did somebody whisper? Vitamin D is made of cholesterol. What have we been told to do with our cholesterol level since 1977? Lower it. Minimize it. We even take Lipitor now to restrict our cholesterol, don't we? By the way, guys, testosterone is also made of cholesterol. What's the ad on television right after the Lipitor ad to restrict your cholesterol? The Viagra ad to fix what the Lipitor just screwed up. Because we don't understand cholesterol anymore either. So, now back to our foods. Food, available cholesterol, number one on the list is cod liver oil. I don't know who in the hell would eat that. What's number two? Lard. Now think about it in your own family. Aunt Gladys, she's 98 years old, still in tremendous mental and physical health. She grew up frying everything in what? Lard. She took lard sandwiches to school. You know what would happen if I sent my daughters to school with a lard sandwich? I'd have somebody at my door asking about child abuse. We don't get it. We try to eliminate all of these things. We try to live in a sterile little bubble because we don't understand the big picture. And you and I have to be the messengers of the big picture. And the big picture is all things in moderation. We had the USDA this past summer remove, I don't even know if you knew this because it was pretty quiet, USDA removed white potatoes from the WIC program. Did you know that? Do you know why mothers receiving WIC subsidies can no longer get white potatoes? Because the potatoes are making kids fat, according to the USDA. Excuse me, it's the couch potato, not the white potato, that's causing kids to get fat. And we've got to get back to basic nutrition. We have kids that are more overweight than ever before and have a higher amount of nutrient deficiencies than we've ever seen. Because we're not consuming the right foods. We've got to get back to basic agriculture, where we have exercise, we have healthy eating, and healthy living, period. One set of stories that I have to walk you through just because it continues to be the buzz. And at some point, Bill Olmsted might stand up and finish this story because he's heard it a lot. Not because he's any more driven by hormones than anybody else, he just happens to be in my audience a lot. Hormones are the buzzword today. It does not matter where I'm at. I can be at an airport, I can be on an airplane, I can be at a ball game, I can be in a hospital setting, I can be talking to nurses, and everybody is worried about hormones. This is the most common scenario that happens to me, and it happens every week. I will have a 30, 40-something-year-old career woman who's working, has kids at home, legitimately concerned about health and well-being and nutrition of her kids, who will walk up to me and they'll just say, "Are you a real cowboy?" I always answer it the same way. Ma'am, it depends on your definition of a real cowboy. Mine happens to be anyone who is willing to follow the spirit that resides within themselves to see a task to completion, and then willing to accept the responsibility for end results in a real cowboy. If that's your definition, then yes, I qualify. Whatever. What I really wanted to know is, what are you cattlemen putting in the nation's beef supplies causing these young girls to reach puberty at earlier ages? I am so glad you asked me about that. Because you see, our young girls today are reaching puberty 18 months before their mothers, 24 months before their grandmothers. Are you going to make me a lard pie with crust in it? 18 months before their mothers, 24 months before their grandmothers. But I'm curious, do you know what hormone we use in the beef industry? No. We call it estrogen. Oh. And I can see little lights beginning to flicker in her head because she's thinking, wait a minute, I have estrogen. Yes, ma'am. In fact, what I would like you to know is that if you were to take a piece of beef, 3-ounce serving of beef, natural, organic, grass-fed, never had any additional estrogen added to it, that serving of beef will have 1.39 nanograms of estrogen. the same 3-ounce serving of beef from a conventionally produced steer that had the protocol of 2 administered doses of estrogen in its growing life cycle will have 1.89 nanograms of estrogen. 1.39 compared to 1.89. Is that statistically significant? Wait. The average garden salad, like the one we had this evening, with your leafy greens is where you were going, 1,200 nanograms of estrogen. The average cabbage leaf, 2,000 nanograms of estrogen. The average tablespoon of soybean oil, 28,000 nanograms of estrogen. I was on an airplane coming home from Michigan Friday, sitting next to a lady who was worried sick about the hormones in the beef supply, and she's drinking soy milk, which, by the way, should be illegal to call anything from a soybean milk. She's drinking soy juice. And soy is the absolutely off the charts in estrogen. The amount of estrogen, and by the way, I don't have a problem with estrogen. I don't think maybe I should have put it that way. Estrogen in my food supply is not an issue. But the birth control pill that women take today has 34,000 nanograms of estrogen, so you can see why I get a little bit out of shape when somebody who's worried about the hormones in the beef supply is putting 34,000 nanograms of estrogen in their mouth every single day without even knowing it. And then, depending on how the conversation is going, I always gauge this, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. I might then ask them, you don't know where we get that natural estrogen we put in those pills, do you? Oh, this is cool. You see, we take these pregnant horses, we collect their urine, we separate the estrogen out of the urine, we put in a pill and you put it in your mouth. Isn't that neat? And that'll be about time to say, oh, that's my plane, I gotta go. Wait, there's more. Guess what? The European Union, 27 countries across the pond, they have the same concern that you do about science and technology. They do not allow us to send any beef to them if we've ever used any of this nasty estrogen implant. They don't allow their dairy to recombinant bovine somatotropin, and they don't allow their crop producers to use biotechnology crop production. And guess what? Girls in the European Union are reaching puberty 18 months before their mothers, 24 months before their grandmothers. How can it be two countries with such vastly differing views on the adaptation of science and technology have the same exact phenomenon occurring? I'll tell you. We have not had enough global soccer moms who've ever developed a group of breeding heifers. Okay? If you want your breeding heifer to reach, who in the FFA group is a proud beef owner? Don't be bashful. One of you has a beef animal, breeding animal. Brian, do you have a breeding beef animal? Okay. Brian Anderson. If you want your beef heifers, or your gilts by the way, to reach puberty at an early age, what is the first and most important thing you must do to these breeding animals? You can be a committee answer if you want it to be, Brian, but what's the first and most important thing? Feed them! You absolutely have to feed them, and if those heifers or gilts are not at a high enough percentage of body fat, the day you introduce a hormone, you are not going to get a response. And in the beef industry, we introduce a hormone one of two ways. We either give them a prostaglandin, an injection, or we simply run a bull in the pen next to them. Either way, we'll get those heifers to reach puberty at an earlier age, if and only if they're at a high enough percentage of body fat. So now you tell me, our young girls today, compared to a generation ago, higher or lower percentage of body fat? All right. What do you forgot about the couch potato thing? Higher. Not even close. Our young girls today, more or less sexual stimulation on television and computer screens than a generation ago. Off the charts. In fact, 3 weeks ago, a report came out, 77% of all primetime television shows now contain explicit sexual content. Are we to assume that if our girls have a higher percentage of body fat and more sexual exposure visually, that they're any different than a breeding heifer? Absolutely not. But I will give you a bit of personal advice, Lonnie. If you're in a situation comparing a complete stranger's daughter to that of a breeding heifer, a pair of fast shoes comes in handy. They don't care whether you're heiferable or not. It's that easy to explain and understand, okay? And we have to bring it back to the basics. I want to share with you one more. I know you're sick to death of California stories, but I want to share with you one more California story because first week of the year, California Women for Agriculture. I went out on this wine train with a group of women, and I had my wife there. And the chef, Kelly McDonald, got up, he welcomed everybody, he made this nice little pitch about how they are green and how they're only doing things that are best for the environment, ecologically sustainable, and this whole ball of wax. And then he closed by saying, and I think you'll be happy to know that our beef comes from cattle that were only fed barley. 300 California Women for Agriculture all look at Trent saying, oh, this is going to be fun. Well, it wasn't long. Somehow he ended up at my table, and we had a conversation about what he meant when he said his beef is only fed barley. And it was pretty simple. He was concerned about genetically modified crops. And by the way, we have a greater concern about genetically modified crops today than in my lifetime. I am answering this question more often today than ever before. And things that have been accepted and put into practice for 20 years will and are becoming questioned. And he said to me, well, I'm all ears. If you can explain to me why genetically modified crops are a good thing, I want to hear it. And I said, here's my best example. What happened in the United States between 1930 and 1937? Paul? The Dust Bowl absolutely created environmental degradation from Texas to North Dakota, particularly the Great Plains, right? It was unbelievable, unprecedented. We see pictures that you can't even imagine. It destroyed human lives. And why did that happen? Lack of rain. We had drought. Would you be surprised to know that from 2000 to 2007, we had less rain each year than we did from 1930 to 1937? Did we have environmental degradation? Did we have families destroyed? No. In fact, just the opposite. We outproduced each year, year after year after year, despite the drought. And why did that happen? Number one, because farmers have implemented the latest and best conservation tillage and best practices for the environment. Number two, we're able to utilize biotechnology in crop production where we have now varieties of corn that can sit there for a week or 2 weeks or maybe even 3 weeks waiting for a half an inch of precipitation so that the corn pollinates and makes a crop. We have a better environment today because of environmental stewardship in conjunction with science and technology through things like biotechnology and genetically modified organisms. And because of that, we are more efficient food producers in our calling, which is converting natural resources into human consumable products than we've ever been throughout the history of mankind. And when I finished walking through that story, this chef in Napa Valley, Kelly McDonald, looked at me and he said, I'm going to have to seriously rethink my thoughts on genetically modified crops. I'm not standing here telling you that every one of you should be planting genetically modified crops. What I am telling you is that I believe Norman Borlaug, when Norman Borlaug, who by the way won the Nobel Peace Prize, who by the way is credited for saving more human lives than any human being who ever walked the planet other than Jesus, in 2000, speaking at the 30th anniversary of the Nobel Peace Prize recognition in Norway, Norman Borlaug said, I have no doubt that with the science and the research available and in the research pipelines, farmers and ranchers will be able to feed 10 billion people worldwide. The question is whether they will be allowed to use it or not. That's where we're at. Because we have been reluctant to be advocates for what it is that we do. And by the way, explain hormones, biotechnology, and environmental stewardship in a way that affects the consumer, not us. Because we are good about talking about what's important for our farm or ranch to pass it from one generation to the next, but we don't really explain it in a way that benefits the consumer and they realize it affects them. How what we do affects them and the planet is what they care about. And that's how we need to explain every scenario that we have to come in contact with. Because at the end of the day, what it is that we do in agriculture is improve human lives. And it's impossible for me to close here this evening, thanks in part to what Brian told me on the radio today of what his career plans are at this moment, joining the Navy, to remind you that there are two people that are vitally important to the future of our country. The United States farmer and rancher continuing to convert the natural resources into human consumable products that enable mankind food, fiber, pharmaceuticals, and fuel domestically so that we don't have to rely on any other country to get those essentials of life. Equal and parallel to that of the military personnel that for now 236 years have been willing to risk his and her freedom for our freedom. And for the past 3 years, I've been a part of a group called the All-American Beef Battalion, where now in 3 years, in April, we will have fed 80,000 individuals a ribeye. Upon deployment to Afghanistan and Iraq, or returning from Afghanistan and Iraq, simply saying thank you. 3 weeks ago, Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas, fed 5,000 soldiers with the U.S. Army. It is the most humbling experience of my life. Camp Pendleton, a year ago in May, fed 5,000 Marines. And these young heroes come up and say, thank you, we don't deserve this. And I don't even know how to respond because they're the one risking everything for you and I. And there are many things that brought this to my attention, but what really drilled it home for me, because I am 100% German, a little bit hard-headed, and sometimes takes a chisel and a hammer to get things into my head, but this went in pretty quickly. We were doing an All-American Beef Battalion feed at a Wounded Warrior Brigade out of Fort Riley. And after we had fed all of these soldiers who had been home for the most part 2 years rehabilitating at Fort Riley, I was sitting at the table. I was eating. They had already been done. And they were just talking. And they said that on days that it thundered, they couldn't go outside, and in most cases they had to go to the basement because the thunder itself took them back to the front lines. But then they all agreed in unison that the absolute worst day was the 4th of July. And a day that you and I get together and we shoot off fireworks and we celebrate our freedom and what it is that American heroes for 236 years in the name of the United States military have given to us. They have to go in the basement and hide because the sounds of the fireworks take them back to the front lines and the mortar. And I do not take it lightly to think about somebody who has to hide on the day that we're celebrating what it is that they have provided for us. And that's why, as often as I can, I remind everybody who will listen about the importance of the young men and women who continue to say, pick me. I want to be the one who goes and defends our country. And I interview these guys. They've been there 3 times, and they say, I can't wait to get back. It's hard for us to understand. They don't leave anybody behind. And that, I think, is a motto that we should also adopt in agriculture, is that we don't leave anybody behind. Because at the end of the day, our calling is to be the efficient converter of natural resources into the essentials of life. Because the military individuals and the United States farmer and rancher have one goal: improve human lives. And I hope that our young people
that Wade has staying here this evening understand and do not take lightly the challenge that you have, number one, in wearing that jacket, number two, being in the vital, important industry of agriculture. If that's what you want to do, always follow your passion in life, because that's how you make a difference. Don't listen to your parents if they're telling you don't come back to the farm or ranch if that's what you want to do. Because anybody who's willing to follow the Spirit that resides within them ultimately makes a difference and influences people in a positive way. I can't tell you how much it means to me to come back to Harvey, how much it means to me to come to North Dakota as a whole. In fact, the last thing I'm going to say to you is that I was visiting with a guy in Dickinson the other day, and he said, Trent, I know that you've always said that North Dakota is your favorite state, and I think he thought that I was just simply pandering to my radio audience, and when I get the opportunity to speak in North Dakota, and he said, I realize now your scope and your market is nationwide, and you probably don't talk about North Dakota so much. And I said, stop right there, James. I was in Nevada the other day, and people wanted to know why I'm always talking about North Dakota. And you can talk about the landscapes, we can talk about the things that I love, in the Badlands, or whatever the case may be. I'll tell you why I love North Dakota. Because I find a common spirit with people that understand what's really important in life in a greater density in North Dakota than I find anywhere else in this country. I find people in North Dakota who understand that it always has been and it always will be the individuals, not the institutions, that have made the United States of America the greatest place in the world to call home. I simply challenge you to go forward and tell more people about what it is that you do every day and how important it is to improving human lives.